This video alleges that Quorum of the 12 were pro-slavery Missourians known as border ruffians and were the arch enemies of Joseph Smith and his form of Mormonism, which was an anti-slavery religious movement.
After resolving the banking scandal in Kirtland, Ohio, what if I told you that Joseph Smith had only arrived in Missouri in July of 1838, and within 3 months of his arrival, he was accused of treason by Far West and Daviess County Mormons? Going from a financial banking scandal to absolute war and treason against the United States is quite a leap to happen in 3 months' time. But of course, those Mormons that were waiting for Joseph Smith in Far West, W.W. Phelps, John Whitmer, and in Daviess County, I'm sorry to say, Lyman Wright, Elias Higbee, were all set to set up Joseph Smith as a traitor for their traitorous activities and the border ruffian pro-slavery scuffles that they instigated and then blamed Joseph. There is some debate on the exact date that Joseph Smith and the Kirtland Mormons following him arrived in Missouri. According to Michael Quinns, there is a mention only one time in his book, Origins of Power, that Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon arrived in Missouri in January of 1838. This is disputed by other scholars who state that Smith's arrival is pinpointed about March of 1838. Well, with all of this confusion, I always turn to my primary source, Joseph Smith's mother, to find out what her version of the facts are. And according to Lucy Mack's autobiography, which the Mormon Church now names Joseph Smith's biography, according to Lucy Mack Smith, she and the Mormons in Kirtland, Ohio, left Kirtland approximately July of 1838, arriving in, let's say, Missouri around July of 1838. Now, it's reported that Joseph Smith was present at the salt sermon given by Sidney Rigdon, where he swore violence against the authority of the state and that they were going to chop off the heads. They're going to chop up the heads.
Yes, you heard that correctly. W.W. Phelps testified that he overheard Joseph Smith saying that he would chop off the heads of any party that tried to serve him a writ. This is kind of a funny exchange between Sidney Rigdon, I think it's Sidney Rigdon, and another Mormon who said, "Oh, you mean heads in a metaphorical sense?" And Sidney, no, I think it was Orson Pratt who said, "No, I mean that piece of skull and skin between the ears," something like that. Reasonable Doubt and the Forcible Kingdom, written by two Whitmer scholars. It outlines the transcript of the 1838 trial against Joseph Smith for treason, states all the various Far West Mormons and Daviess County Mormons that testified directly against the interest of Joseph Smith, alleging that Joseph Smith was planning a war against the United States and bringing in the kingdom of God, which was going to be his theocratic kingdom, and it was going to be by force. That is why this article is called The Forcible Kingdom. Many have blamed the outcome of Richmond on Samson Artvard, leader of the Danite organization, for turning against Joseph Smith and other church leaders. However, Artvard was joined by many other witnesses whose testimony was just as damaging to the Mormons. Those affiliated with the Quorum of the 12 were all witnesses against Joseph Smith. For example, John Corll, a counselor to Bishop Edward Partridge, testified as follows. Joseph Smith said that if the people would let us alone, we would preach the gospel in peace. But if they came on us to molest us, we would establish our religion by the sword. These things were to be carried on through the instrumentality of the Danite band, as far as the force was necessary. They were organized unto the bands of 10s, 50s, and ready for war. The concepts found in the kingdom of God, according to this article by George Jones and Barbara Higdon, this kingdom of God
was being testified to and outlined during the Richmond trial in front of Judge King.
Kingdom of God? I thought that wasn't announced by Joseph Smith until 1844. And here they're testifying in front of the entire world at the trial in Missouri that they're going to be installing the kingdom of God in 1838. I'm confused.
March the 11th, 1844, Nauvoo, Illinois. Joseph Smith called together a council that he and others saw as the beginning of the literal kingdom of God on earth. That council, known both as the Council of the Kingdom of God, or as more commonly called the Council of 50, because it had roughly 50 members, functioned under the prophet's direction until his martyrdom in June of 1844.
The kingdom of God sort of sounds like the Mormon militia established in Far West, with 50 men underneath a lead council. Oh, that's right. The Danite vigilantes, kingdom of God, Danite vigilantes, kingdom of God, going to war with Missouri, going to war with the United States. Oh, I get it now. The theocratic Mormon Danite kingdom of God.
Here it is. George Hinkle testified the following. The general teachings of the presidency were that they were setting up was a temporal as well as a spiritual kingdom, and that at this time the kingdom was to be set up by, listen to this, quote unquote, forcible means if necessary. This is a declaration of war by the Quorum of the 12 against the United States government. The Quorum of the 12 is trying to convict through their false testimony treason of Joseph Smith, that they are basically saying Joseph Smith was the architect of this kingdom of God, which was to establish the kingdom of God by forcible means, if necessary, against the United States government. And that was the definition of treason. And this is what the Far West and Daviess County Mormons were trying to prove against Joseph Smith.
And the article continues with W.W. Phelps testifying that he overheard Sidney Rigdon say in April of 1838 that he would resist all writs by force and that Joseph Smith approved of this. According to the journal article, Sidney Rigdon states
that they meant to resist the law, and if a sheriff came with them with writs, they would kill him. And if anybody opposed them, they would take off their heads. George W. Harris, who was present, observed, "You mean the heads of their influence, I suppose?" Rigdon answered, he meant that lump of flesh and bones called the skull or scalp. Joseph Smith followed Mr. Rigdon, approving of his sentiments, and said that this was what they intended to do. So in April of 1838, was Joseph Smith in Far West? Well, according to several sources, he was not. In 1838, in April, Joseph Smith was back east trying to arrange a resolution for the Kirtland banking scandal, and it was not until July of 1838 that he rejoined his family. Joseph Smith Sr. also had been being held somewhat a prisoner in Tunbridge during that period of time. The Smith family rejoined each other in Kirtland and made their way to Clay County in July of 1838. Now, many may dispute this, but I went through Rough Stone Rolling by Busherman. I went through the Quinn books, Origins of Power. They are very fuzzy on the date that Joseph Smith moves from Kirtland to Missouri. And in fact, the only direct reference I can find in the Quinn book is his belief that Joseph Smith went from Kirtland to Missouri, Far West, in January of 1838.
Now, the way this date can be fixed is if one reads Lucy Mack's autobiography correctly, Joseph Smith Jr. disappeared and went on a mission to Cincinnati to work out the banking scandal. After Joseph Smith disappeared in the night that Joseph Smith Sr., the very next day, was arrested. Joseph Smith Sr. allowed to escape and was taken by friendly Mormons up to Tunbridge for approximately 6 months. Lucy states that she had to send some of her boys up
to make sure that Joseph Smith Sr. was alive and was doing okay at the home of a particular Mormon in Tunbridge, Vermont. Okay? So neither Joseph Smith, who is reported to have fled to Cincinnati to work out the banking scandal, nor Joseph Smith Sr., who appears somewhat to be held prisoner in Tunbridge, Vermont, neither of them were near Kirtland during all of the first part of 1838. However, Lucy Smith says that things seemed to resolve, and Joseph Smith Sr. joined his family, and the 27 families that were still remained in Kirtland left Kirtland and arrived in Missouri sometime in July of 1838, meaning that Joseph Smith was nowhere to be found in Missouri when all these witnesses, W.W. Phelps, John Whitmer, Sidney Rigdon, all stating that Joseph Smith was encouraging them to fight against the United States and install the kingdom of God, which was the kingdom set forth in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And it was to be done by force. Poor Joseph Smith arrived only 1 month before the Gallatin violence and somehow was blamed for it.
My theory is that Joseph Smith did not move to Far West or Daviess County, but rather moved to Clay County, ground zero for the Bleeding Kansas border ruffians. And this would explain why Joseph Smith was tried for treason in the county of his residency, which was Clay County, Richmond, Missouri. So why would the Utah Mormon Church contend that Joseph Smith was in Far West and Daviess County at the time of his arrest? Well, unless they placed Joseph Smith in Far West and Daviess County, where the violence was occurring by the Far West and Daviess County Mormons, then Joseph Smith would be exonerated from treason, which he actually was 4 years later in the courtroom in Quincy in front of the Honorable Stephen Douglas. Joseph Smith was exonerated from any involvement in any of the violence in Missouri. But do you think any of the Mormon scholars focus on Joseph Smith's exoneration from the violence? No. They want you to believe that Joseph Smith was a Danite and a violent criminal and encouraged and promoted violence against Missouri and the USA and was a border ruffian himself, a Danite, a criminal, a thief, and plainly insane man, as all of these Far West and Daviess County Mormons were. All the Danites were extremely mentally imbalanced. John D. Lee, Samson Ardvarn, Porter Rockwell. I mean, you can look in their eyes and see the craziness in their eyes. And again, why does the Mormon Church want to portray Joseph Smith as a crazy, violent, vigilante, anti-USA criminal? Well, I think it's their little adolescent boyhood fascination with the violent, wild, wild West. They want to think of their boy king, Joseph Smith, as riding into the sunset with his Rough Riders behind them and declaring war on the United States. Also, as historian Webster Tarpley disclosed, all these Mormon political leaders trace their bloodline to the Danites who were involved in the Mount Meadow massacre.